Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining Analytic Stories today. I'm super happy to have Zach Gemignani with me from Juice Analytics. I've known Zach and his company for probably a good 10 years, and they've really done a lot in the area of data visualization. I think before people were really talking about it. So they've been on the forefront of this space for a long time. And I think we're going to learn a lot from his experience, not only with the software, but of course with customers and learning how to really be effective. So Zach, thanks so much for being with us today.
Very happy to be here, Lee. You made me feel a little old with saying that we were around when data visualization was before data visualization, but really happy to be here. We have been, as a company, we've been around for over 15 years, and we've certainly seen some progress in this field, and some areas where it still feels like there's a lot for people to learn and improve.
Yeah, speaking of being ahead of the time, I was thinking about something else too, because you wrote this book, Data Fluency, and I forgot how long ago you wrote the book. And
Yeah, it's probably been 5 or 6 years
yeah,
now since the book came out. Yeah.
and that term is just starting to be used, because the term data literacy has been kind of starting to bubble up, and data fluency is just getting into the stream a little bit. So I'm like, that's pretty good that they were putting that out
I
there.
think this has been one of our challenges as a company, and I think anyone who starts a company, you want to be doing interesting, innovative things, and always trying to be on the leading edge. At least for us, it's been really important to be trying to think about what's next. We were talking about data storytelling very early, and when data storytelling was starting to come around, and we've been talking about data products for some time. And sometimes I feel like we're a little ahead of where the mainstream discussion is in the data field, which it's fun in some degree, and to some degree we do. If you're ahead of things, people aren't quite ready to
Sure.
embrace them.
Yeah, getting out and being that leader always has its pros and cons,
It sure does.
along the way. But we'll take advantage and dive into the leadership qualities and everything here. So I want to get going and get right in and start picking your brain here.
Right.
So now, we already said you've been in this field for a long time, and we know we've talked about already. You've built this company up, and you've written a book. And so, if you can think about, this is a tough one, 3 things. I would like to work in threes that you've
Me too.
seen clients struggling with, and taking those 3 into account. What's one thing that you think our listeners can do in the next, say, couple of weeks that they could do to address one or more of those problems? I want to give people something very actionable that they can do to address these kinds of things.
So we see, and just to kind of put a scope around it, at Juice, we're working with companies that have a lot of data and are struggling with the challenge of how do they communicate that data within the organization and also to their customers externally. And this is a problem that we've seen for a long time. Many years ago, we started talking about this idea of the last mile of data, which is that last step that I think a lot of your followers and community think about of how do you've got the valuable data, maybe you've done the analysis,
Yeah.
but how do you deliver that and communicate that in a way that is going to engage people and get them to understand what they should do about that data, what it means, and of course, what actions they should take on that. And we started talking about the last mile of data of analytics 10 or 12 years ago, and it is certainly a thing that we still see a lot of
Yeah.
companies struggling with. The symptoms of that are many. So we work with organizations where we see tons and tons of dashboards and reports. You've probably seen this too, where there's just this proliferation of volumes and volumes of people's efforts to try to communicate data in lots of forms. So
Yeah.
there's so many reports and dashboards that you can hardly sift through it and know what's important in it. We see that. I think a corollary connected piece to that is people are creating dashboards and ways of delivering data, but there's very little engagement by the
Yeah.
audience, by the people on the other side of that.
Mhm.
So that's certainly very common, and that's, it's tied together. If you have all these things that you're trying to push out, who's got the attention span to sift through what's important and know what they should be looking at? Um, and I think, the other thing we see is that data visualization and the ability to create really good data products is still kind of the domain of a small group of people with more technical expertise. This is one of
Mm.
the things that's really important to us, is how do we make it easier for people to be able to create really effective ways of communicating and presenting data. So all this, it's sometimes hard to pull all these parts apart, but I think it's all this challenge of how do we better bridge that gap, to take the data and the useful insights that have been pulled out of analysis, but really communicate it in effective ways so people will actually use it. Um, so how do you solve that? The second part of your question is
I
what's
don't want
one
to say
thing that
necessarily solve it, but
it's
how can what's something you can do if you're someone that says, "Yeah, I've got one or more of those situations." What's something you've seen as effective that someone could start doing, right? Because there's the kind of the long thread of, yeah, here's how you solve it over time, and sometimes people get stuck, right? So it's like,
right.
okay, we've seen this. Here's something you can do to start down that path so that you can keep moving forward and not just get kind of analysis paralysis of how do you
Yeah.
solve your own problem.
Yeah. Well, let me. There's a couple ideas. I'm violating your question already, but one, I think one of the things is break all the rules.
Exactly.
Where you do get in this place. I think a lot of organizations and people get in this place of trying to create the comprehensive set of all the data they should present, and all the metrics and all the different important pieces of information that they should put in a dashboard. Or this is why you end up with all these reports.
Yeah.
um, I think getting people to really figure out what is one win that they can focus on communicating, and zooming all the way down to that one level, and say, you know, what is a piece of data that if I delivered that to the management team or frontline salespeople, whatever it is, um, and they could understand that, and they understood what they could do with that piece of data, that people would start to change their behaviors. They'd start to
Yeah.
absorb that one thing. So really zooming in, we're often trying to help our clients do this. Like, I know there's a big problem here. There's a ton of data, but let's find a win that is a great starting point, because that's going to help you build some momentum of connecting to people, showing that you can deliver value through the data. So that's sort of a general thing. That
Yeah.
one of the
Oh,
Go ahead.
I would say I like that because tendency, there's a tendency, and I think also a concern that I need to do more,
Yeah,
right? And because like, well, if I only do that little piece and I know that I have more data, why shouldn't I do that too?
right.
Right. So it's not even that they don't have the information kind of thing. It's like they feel that they have it, they should add that in because someone's going to ask about, right? And so they feel, I think, well, maybe like I haven't done my job well, or if people ask that question and I haven't answered it yet and I know I could, how do I explain to them kind of this point of we're just trying to get started. And if we could do more, but we didn't want to wait, we wanted to, I always advocate like you do, I think, like, let's get something in front of people. Let's get them to react to it. Because also they might react differently than we anticipated. We could spend all this time building something out. And it's like, yeah, we didn't want to go down that path. We wanted to go down this path. And then you just blew a whole bunch of time anyway, right? And that maybe doesn't make you look good either. Like, you didn't even understand what we wanted.
That's right. That's right. I think sometimes there is this kind of tyranny of all the requirements that could exist. And I mean, we saw this long ago when people were building data warehouses that never got done because it was just like, what is all the information, the data that we could possibly need in there? And I think you have to recognize the cost of trying to do everything. And especially in this world, we were talking before we started about attention spans. In the world of short attention spans, giving people too much information is kind of the equivalent of giving them nothing. Because if they don't have the ability to wrap their head around everything you're showing, they're probably going to try to move on to something that they can absorb. So I think that sense of like just finding that first hook, getting someone's attention, and thinking about how you can help your user be successful, be a hero in their job. This is kind of a related concept that we will often encourage is, put yourself in the shoes of that person who's receiving the data. If they could make some smart decision and look good in the process, that success is going to flow back to you if you're a creator of data reports and dashboards.
I think that's a real skill, though, that people have to learn. It's not just beyond just saying, "Oh, put yourself in their position." Because I think, especially if you're someone who's just used to doing the work this way, it's not like you can just shift and necessarily be good at that side of it. But I think that's where organizations have to build skill, right? And say it's more than just throwing software at somebody or having more data, right? These are kind of softer skills about that are part of the equation that I think people are starting to recognize a little bit now that they're getting some of the technical stuff a little bit more under wraps. Like, they're getting the data thing a little bit better organized. They're kind of getting the software piece a little bit better, getting people skilled on the software, and they're coming up against the things you said. We've got too many dashboards, or people aren't engaging with them. And what are some of those reasons? Or on the flip side or the additional side, I should say, of the skill set that they've got to work on, more of the fluency, literacy kind of thing. So
this is all like throwback stuff for me. Is like, we used to say, we like to talk about how analytics is it's not a technical problem, it's a social problem. Which is exactly what you're pointing out, is this sense of just like, it's about people absorbing information, absorbing data. And I think the whole analytics data sphere, focused a lot of energy on how can we gather more data and machine learning and AI and all these capabilities, which are all important and powerful in a sense. But at the end of the day, you need to be reaching people and changing people's behaviors about how they make decisions. And this is the kind of data fluency and the social aspects that are hard, in some ways harder to change. You can't go buy a technology. You can't just go buy that, right? And we're starting to see, I think, you point out, like, data literacy is becoming a more common concept, and we're hearing from and seeing more big organizations that recognize that they need to invest in the people and the people's skills and their culture more. And it's not like a solution that's going to come from IT.
Yeah. So I want to make a comment, and then I think this actually goes into the next question I wanted to ask you. I think one of the problems is it's called database, data visualization, data literacy, data fluency. It all
Okay.
starts with
Yeah, yeah.
data, right? So like, well, of course, well, it starts with data, then people are going to think about data first, right? So,
Yep.
but so one of the things I think about, like you're saying, the culture is, and I think one of the obstacles to that I've seen around adoption is this notion of kind of self-service, and I think that's a big part of where the what has to go on here. But I think it sounds, one of those things, again, sounds easy, self-service, but it's
Yeah.
not. It's not so easy when it comes to actually making it, enabling it in the organization, again, beyond the software that lets you do it. And I think it definitely has to do with people, culture, skill, that whole thing. And these are all areas that are hard to change, and it makes people uncomfortable. So I'm curious about your thoughts on how, or not just your thoughts, but how have you helped people through that change, either in kind of how you've designed the software, or other things you've done in working with customers to kind of get over that discomfort of that side of the change.
Yeah, I think we've been hearing about democratization of data for a long time, and I think
Mm.
that has the progress on that is not complete. Self-service, I think there've been self-service BI to me at this point is not really a good thing you would want to call something because it just
Mm.
doesn't that so
Interesting.
seldom works out is in my experience. Like giving someone a self-service tool doesn't feel like the adoption of that. There's been a lot of research. It's just very little adoption of self-service BI and analytics. So there is a real problem there. And I think it is worth thinking about it both from the kind of tools, like what are the right tools? How do we make better tools, more user-friendly tools that allow people to engage with data? And then how do we teach people the skills, or make it part of the culture and create the habits around that? A couple of things on the culture side of things. To me, the thing that I think is an important starting point in most organizations when it comes to driving kind of data fluency or data engagement is really about leadership and the expectations that leaders set, and
Mm-hmm.
the examples they set. So, if you have a leadership team that talks about wanting to use data more, but then doesn't do it in the way they make decisions
Right.
and the way they communicate to the organization, like
What's the point?
um,
Right.
it's this is like there are parenting lessons here, like demonstrate the
Yeah.
behaviors you want to see so
Cool.
there's
Simple stuff. Yeah.
it's simple, just like show that if you're saying to your organization the data is important, that should be demonstrated from the executive levels and management levels. And then I'm a big I've been thinking a bunch about how do you create habits of behaviors. So I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of getting data driven decision making or something into your organization is about getting people kind of comfortable with that and doing it and starting meetings by looking at that dashboard that you created, having that as good starting points.
I like that
So
idea. Yeah.
there's a whole set of, I think, social and cultural things that are important things to change. The thing that's of particular interest to us at Juice is creating a way so that it's a lot easier for non-technical people to be able to communicate data. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that we are doing right now is we're launching a solution that is really intended to fill this gap that we've seen between for all those business users who want to be able to who present data as part of what they do in their job. And this is, whether you're a salesperson and you want to use data to make your case, or you're in the marketing department, or you're a consultant and you want to deliver your results and show the data. There's a whole set of use cases where the more complex analytical tools that exist out there are not great for that type of business user who has data, knows how to tell a story or convey a message, but struggles with how do they combine those two things, like conveying a message like a presentation, but bringing data into that presentation.
So is this kind
And
of
that's a
like you're
solution that
addressing your point of you don't really love the idea of self-service as a model?
well,
It's kind of
well
hitting
I
on
think
that.
I think that I think what we've seen in a lot of technology areas is that there is a first generation of self-service tools that are a little more complex to start with. Think of Photoshop, or even I would argue things like Tableau or something are powerful tools that are presented as self-service, but really require a lot of technical expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you're seeing more and more now are a next generation of tools that are lighter weight, web-based, and kind of easier for anyone to pick up. And I think that's kind of the next revolution that I think needs to occur in the data visualization space. Is a big step forward in making things easier for people to get started, even if you aren't particularly technical or don't work in
that.
data all the time.
So it's kind of like Photoshop and Canva.
This is an example I use a lot, right? Exactly. I think that there's Photoshop and Canva, the ability for anyone who's not, you don't need to spend a lot of time learning the tool, and you can get started and you create something pretty good, pretty fast. And it might not give you every control that Photoshop gives you, but that's not the point. You're just trying to create something good in a lightweight way.
Yeah. I like that idea. I think there is an area where people are getting stuck, and especially as you branch out and it's interesting you bring this up, because as data branches out into the organization more, right? Where when you said this idea before about data democratization. So as it expands, it's like, well, now you're getting to a whole other set of kind of, potential users.
Right.
And it's just, I always say, it's like, these are just everyday folks in the company, and they're not necessarily data, people or technical. It's just that's not where their skill is, right? And now all of a sudden you may expect them to be doing these things. It's like, but should they be doing them? And how much effort do you want to put behind that? And maybe there's, like you said, maybe there's multiple solutions. And so there's for people that are more advanced and capable, and they can have a Tableau. And then for people that, want something that's, maybe there's a space for, a juice analytics in there. And I think companies are starting to deal with that kind of a thing. I see that now already, where before it was like, we need one solution. And now they're like, no, maybe we need multiple, which is a whole nother issue about management and so forth. But that's a different problem. So I want to ask you, I love talking about this area, but I do want to ask you one more thing, and actually builds on something you said, which was great. So you talked about people, the habit of starting a meeting with this stuff. So I want you to imagine that you may have many superpowers, but one of them is you can shrink down and you sneak into meetings, your customer meetings. So, but there's one thing about this superpower, that when they start talking about one thing in particular, that's like you're going to grow back to your normal size because now you want to be able to help them. Okay. I know this is weird.
Okay.
Might think about things are too strange. So
So do
what?
I want to grow back to full size, or I want to stay small in this?
You want to. Well, so this is actually that's a great point. So, what is the thing that if they were really good at, you wouldn't they wouldn't ever have to talk about the problem, and you could just stay small and keep sneaking around the meeting. So it's kind of like, what could they get good at? you know. So
what am I going to do with the sneaking? I've often wanted the superpower to shrink down like that and see customers' budgets. But maybe that's what I can do while I'm very small.
There you go.
But it is very interesting. So what is it that I like? What do my customers struggle with that we're always having to help with, that I just wish they had that capability?
Yeah.
Could internalize that capability. Tell you one of the things that comes up a lot is that, and this is especially when we're dealing with people who are analysts, and they're in this role of maybe we call it a data translator. You've probably heard that term. It's, they're in this role of where they need to take some data, and they're putting together some way of presenting it. And I really wish people in those roles would recognize the power that they have to bring their point of view. There's this unique role of people dealing with data and communicating data where they often understand the business problems. You hope they understand the business problems and priorities, and they're also able to work with data. And sometimes they don't bring, they're uncomfortable with bringing their point of view and be able to make some choices about what they present and how they present it in order to help focus the conversation and help sort of clarify and identify what's most important and prioritize things.
It's like all the way back to your first point about.
I'm sure I've been going on loops for
years, but it brings it back together, like how we can actually
like have that, like I think there's a sense of, like, as we said, like you need to show everything, or I'm being told what to do, or I need to do that, versus the people who are willing to kind of step up and say, I understand these two sides, and other people don't. So you're in a very powerful position if you're a data translator like that, and taking advantage of that so that you actually are expressing what you think are the most important things. It's something I feel like I have to encourage people a lot and help people kind of build that confidence that they can do that. And I wish more people were more willing to take on that role, because I think it's a very valuable thing to be able to do, to combine those two sides and then express it in a clearer way so that kind of everybody benefits if you do that.
So if you have that kind of a person, you would hope that they would, make sure they step in. Let's say that person doesn't exist. We'll kind of close out with this. They don't exist. What would you be hearing? What would that exchange be like between, say, two people? And that would be kind of your trigger word that you'd grow back to normal Zach size because they're not coordinating the right way.
Oh, I think you end up with this scenario of, like, the business is asking for, like, these are the phrases where that you make this. There's a sense that the business needs this, and therefore I'm going to deliver what the business needs, which is sort of a way of separating yourself away from, well, we're all part of the business and we're all trying to achieve something. So, but if you step back like that, you're not taking ownership of what is important. And I think when I hear that kind of language, that there's a kind of us versus them, or two sides to things, then I think that's sort of the trouble brewing.
Yeah, I like that, because I think that gets into the whole area of democratization again. How does this benefit the company? what is the goal of all, of all this in
Right.
particular? And, there's this idea of ownership, right? Even the fact that you say it's like the the business team and the IT team are, kind of always been working somewhat independently of each other,
Right.
and now they have to kind of learn to work together in a different way. And it's not just those two, right? I think it's just, I think data in general is forcing people to work
Yep.
together in ways that they haven't been, and they're doing it without any coaching, right? It's just like they're just being smushed together, and
Right.
it's like, right, and there's this expectation that somehow how to do that, like everybody knows how to do that in a way that's constructive. And I think it's much harder than, back to this whole thing of it's beyond self-service, but
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I think the data is that sort of cohesive thing, and it bridges everything. And to make great use of it, you do need to work very closely. So I think that's a great way to put it.
yeah. So maybe one of the things, just as a closing idea, is that if organizations don't have somebody like this, you said translator, business, and a new kind of business analyst, maybe they need that role. And maybe it's not a permanent role. Maybe it's even a role that exists for a couple of years or something, as organizations make that transition. And then once it becomes the norm and people learn how to do that, maybe that role can go away or become something else. Uh, Maybe it doesn't
Yeah,
have to be there
I think that would
forever.
be true. I think it's. I mean, this goes to my point about uh, finding some wins or setting some examples. Like a great
Yeah.
data translator would come in and help make some of those connections and show the business how data is going to help them, and show the people who are working with data how they can successfully deliver that data in good ways, and just kind of show how it's done. I think sometimes when people see great examples of
Hmm.
what work, then they know what they should be aspiring to. I know. I mean, I'm sure you do this in your work a lot, where it's like, here's a great dashboard that is effectively
Right.
communicating on a topic. And once people see that, they can start to
You
emulate
need
it
that win. Yep.
and then build off of it. But without that good example, they end up flailing about. They're trying to just figure it out from a blank page, and that's really
Yeah.
hard.
It's kind of like people say you need to see what's possible, um,
Yep.
and get started with it. Well, I want to be respectful of your time and our audience. And close out. Uh, these are all great topics. I definitely want to encourage folks to go over and to check out Juice and see kind of what they're working on, and see the product that's coming out, and just, I think, even just to get, no pun intended, the flavor of how things can be, how they're done differently than maybe some of the things people are working with today. Even just, power. I always say it's power. It's everything from Excel to the most sophisticated applications that they're all suffering from these problems. It's not just one piece of software
That's right.
that's got it. And then the people side, of course. So thanks, Zach, so much for your time again. Really good conversation. We got a lot of stuff out of you in a short time. So
You squeezed it
uh,
out.
we
Thanks,
squeezed
Lee.
it out.
Real
Yeah.
pleasure. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, and be safe and enjoy the holidays.
Excellent.
See ya.
Thanks.
Bye.